to Tomorrow's People, the podcast brought to you by Personio and me, Perry Timms. Everything starts with people. And on this episode, somebody who has an acute focus on people from a technology and talent perspective, Dr. Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic, a renowned author, speaker, and leading light on the future. In this episode, we'll be looking at his latest work and his latest book, I, Human, and the hot topic of generative AI. What lies ahead for us? Tomas will help us map our way into the future. So welcome, Tomas, to Tomorrow's People podcast. Great to have you here.
Likewise. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I feel like a League One football club has just got Lionel Messi on loan. That's how I feel right now.
Well, that's not that far from reality these days. It's called the MLS. And,
exactly.
I said to a friend yesterday, if they call me to play with him because all his friends are going, I'm ready.
Oh. So we'll add that to your considerable talents. But your story's long and varied in terms of how you got here now. And I'm sure people can look back on books that you've written and so on. But what's really hot for you right now? What are you focusing on this moment?
Yeah, look, I mean, the broad to high level answer is always trying to kind of make real world organizational practices more science driven. And as you know, I'm very focused on talent and leadership. But I think, over the past 5-6 years, a specific niche that has really kept me up at night is the human-AI interface. Mm-hmm. So how organizations can help to rehumanize work so that we can make the AI age the human AI age.
Yeah, that's a lovely ring to it, doesn't it? And I think the headlines are everywhere at the moment. And I've seen you on national news broadcasts talking about this because it's really piqued people's curiosity, hasn't it? Do you see it that it is almost like how the internet was several decades ago, but perhaps with a twist?
Yeah, could be. I would say the main difference is for so long, decades, if not centuries, we've been exposed to science fiction accounts of cyborgs and intelligent machines taking over. And, I've rewatched Kubrick's 2001 Space Odyssey recently, and a lot of it is, I think, still in the popular kind of unconscious or so. But yeah, I think the effect could certainly be comparable. Maybe the difference is, I don't know about you, but I don't remember the early days of the internet leading to such a bimodal, alarmist or techno, utopian view. It seems like you have 20-30% of big tech companies telling us that this will make us happier, fitter, more productive, as the famous Radiohead song did a while back. And the remaining 80% is so apocalyptic, so alarmist, that I think what I'm trying to do is to add a little bit of nuance without being too boring. Because I think these days, when you highlight the ups and downs and tries to inject nuances or caveats, you kind of lose people's attention because they gravitate towards the extremes.
Yeah. And I guess you're right. There's a different sensation to it, isn't there? Because the internet just felt like we could access information more readily. And then I suppose we saw some iterations of that with the social web, Cambridge Analytica and so on. Suddenly people started to feel a little bit more fearful, didn't they?
Yeah. And I think maybe what we should try to move beyond of is this sort of territorial or competitive take on, is this thing smarter than us? Has it achieved or surpassed human level of intelligence? So I think instead of wondering if AI is smarter than us, we need to be asking ourselves how we can be smarter with AI.
Yeah, which I guess is going to the premise of the book, really, isn't it? Because there was a really strong play in the subtitle that you put about us being unique. And I've picked up some sense. Now, you'll maybe like this. I asked Bing AI to do me a little summary of that book because I just thought, what will it tell me about it, right? And it very cleverly did weave the 3 sections out. And it did talk about our need to be adaptable. And I think there's some really strong messages in there from you, isn't there, about we've got to get ourselves equipped for this age. Is that true?
It is true. And I think adaptability is the key. We've always evolved through our technological inventions. So it can be fire, hunting weapons, the wheel, electricity, the internet, and AI is no different. I mean, it's still a human invention. So even if you're asking the wrong question, which is this smarter than us? That's not logical to us because it's still an extension of our intelligence. We created it. Having said that, I do think that we still need to work out how exactly we can use this tool to enhance our adaptability. And, there is a lot of research that our dear esteemed HR colleagues and, professionals/clients hate me to bring up,
Right.
which is the fact that, for every dollar you invest in technology, you probably have to invest around $9 or £9 on the human factor, which is reskilling and upskilling people, change management, and preparing people mentally, culturally, and psychologically so that they can actually leverage the benefits of technology. And HR hates to hear this because they know it, but they cannot sell it to the CFO or the companies. So it's actually, the CFOs don't want to listen to this. After they spend all this money in technology, you're telling me now there's no productivity increases because people don't care about it or they feel antagonized by it.
Wow. Because again, you used a very crucial word, even in the title of your book, when you brought out the sense of automation. Because I do think there are lots of people who draw a direct line between AI and automation instantly. And it's a part of it, isn't it? But it isn't just the only part of it.
Yeah, I think, in theory, you first standardize things, and once they are standardized, you can automate it. And that's the kind of bleak part that I highlight in the book, that, we've kind of standardized ourselves so much, even though we're perfectly capable of being creative, imaginative, and smart. Even for knowledge workers, our day-to-day experience of work is very robotic. We react, if you email me and I can use autocomplete email to respond, I will. And maybe, we need to wait for AI to just email, your AI emails my AI, but then we need to work out what we do with the time we save. And so, there is AI automation, but there is also human autonomy. And I think we need to recover some autonomy so that automation takes care of the things that are boring and repetitive, but then we find agentic ways to kind of reimagine work.
I picked up through both my actual reading of the book, which I'm not quite through yet, and then the summary that I got from Bing AI, that actually there is a really strong urge for us to rediscover much more meaningful, complex, curious aspects to who we are, right? And I got the sense that was the uniqueness you really wanted to bring out from this, like our artistic self, our curious self. And I see AI as a liberating force for that. But you also pick up a lot about the dark side, don't you?
Well, the dark side is what we've allowed AI to do so far, which is co-opt or hijack our attention, make us more impulsive, make us, experience a sense of languishing at work. And actually, there's this bleak reality, which is that all the time savings that we basically were gifted from the early phase of the digital revolution were then probably mostly wasted on social media. I mean, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. And, so I do think it requires a little bit of effort and dedication to reinvest that time. And I think, in part, we need to rediscover the forgotten pleasures of the analog world. And I think a lot of value will be given to analog, like this now. I mean, we could have done this remotely, but there's still something special that we miss if we're only doing things virtually and if we standardize everything. And by the way, we still have to be somewhere, right? Even if we're in the metaverse, we still have to be physically somewhere. And the second one is to work out how we can use technology to actually advance our creativity. So for instance, that's nothing new. Andy Warhol was probably the master at it. He kind of made fun of art by commoditizing it through an industrial production, and his studio was called The Factory, but then actually advancing it simultaneously because there was a story behind, there was an experience, and there was kind of the aura of authenticity that he was adding by being the human part of the equation.
Nice way to think about it. And I can remember when people talked about AI, they would say, yes, it will look over complex contracts and take all that heavy lifting away, but it won't do creative, they said. And what do we see? Artistic AI and poetic AI, don't we?
Yeah, it's in fact used more for artistic productions and creative tasks than for the repetitive tasks that we thought, So actually, there's more people who are digital marketeers enjoying it than paralegal, kind of stuff.
So true. But the temptation, I suppose, is, as you say, for us to get lost in the dark side and ignore the possibilities on the lighter side. So were there any really hot takes around things where you thought AI could absolutely push new frontiers and give us some real pioneering breakthrough discoveries?
Look, so, I focus on the area that I understand, which is talent and HR or leadership applications of AI or human, skills. And even though people think I'm wildly optimistic and somehow crazy when I say this, I do think that AI can be a fundamental tool to advance meritocracy in organizations and to actually improve diversity and inclusion.
Wow.
Of course, people think that's crazy because we've seen so many examples so far of algorithms breaking bad or AI going rogue. But those examples actually highlight that AI can be a wonderful tool to expose and detect biases that exist in a culture, right? So when Microsoft or Amazon ditch a chatbot because it was trained to predict who should get promoted, and that AI basically recommends a surplus of white middle-aged engineers. Even if you ditch the AI, middle-aged white male engineers will still get promoted, right? So imagine tweaking or editing the AI so that it recommends what you need, not what you've had before. It will be a little bit like tweaking the recommendation system or engine of Spotify or Netflix. So that doesn't show you what you always watch, but it shows you something that would make you a little bit more open-minded and expose you to different things, So it can be done. We don't do it because we love our own biases and we don't want somebody or something to burst our filter bubble.
That's true. There's a lovely meeting, isn't there, of our psyche and a machine trying to almost hack it a bit, but in a productive way.
Exactly.
Wow. I mean, that's very clever, isn't it? And I suppose we do have to keep our guard up so that we are not completely hypnotized by technology and so on. And you rightly pointed to how we've managed to fill time with almost pointless things, right? The stimulus has been almost like addictive, but I'm sensing that you can see the possibility that the stimulus is much more productive.
Yeah, that's a great point. And actually, I think part of the problem is, our brains are lazy by design. They're not for thinking. They are for minimizing energy burn and for making everything as predictable and as, we think in fast mode. Thinking slowly is tedious and I always challenge even executives who are very smart and very skilled to tell me what percentage of a typical day they actually spend thinking. And if they say anything above 40%, I know they're lying. The majority of honest people will say maybe 5-10%, and that feels like, wow, there was something. So, so I think part of the problem is that we are optimizing for speed, for efficiency, and for cost reduction. We're not optimizing for quality increase or for, it's the same with ChatGPT. Most people, or Bing or any generative AI, most people use it to get a quick fix and very fast answers or to optimize for speed. They're not really using it in a way that actually enables them to engage in deep curiosity. And the fact that deep learning is used to describe artificial intelligence, not human intelligence, really bothers me.
That's an interesting turn of phrase I hadn't really thought about. Maybe the depth they're talking about there is the sheer volume of data that's in there rather than the depth, like you said, in a curious and maybe even exploratory sense. I really do like what you've come up with there. You mentioned chatbots earlier on. I mean, do you think they're still a bit of a fad, or do you think there's a real dawning of chatbots becoming more useful for us?
Well, I think, in many ways, the non-technical, so AI people don't like when I say this, but the non-technical kind of way to see generative AI is sort of as the evolution of chatbots, right? And what they have added is a real conversational feel to it. And they certainly improved a lot in their ability to interpret what's being asked. I mean, it's very rare that the question is misinterpreted. Before, all these things were very clunky. So, interestingly, I haven't seen huge plans or a substantial change in companies' interest in developing more chatbots and automating, because that's already out there. Instead, what we're seeing is that smart organizations understand that every job will change in its skill and talent constellation. So you're much less likely to lose your job to AI than a human using AI if you don't do. And actually, even if our jobs are probably not going to go, we're systematically going to change how we do them. And what I talk about in the book is that basically all of the IQ related skills will become less relevant in humans, but all of the EQ related skills will become more relevant because things like, kindness, consideration, and compassion, AI cannot do compassion.
Yeah. Very good point. And a Harvard article that comes to mind there is Rasmus Højgaard's compassion, right? And the whole sense of that. And I think we saw a real yearning for that during the pandemic, didn't we? Where leaders who showed up in that way suddenly seemed to mean more to their people and their organizations. Are you seeing a sort of snap back though? Are you seeing people kind of going, well, that was okay for now, but it's a tough world out there. I've got to get tougher again. Are you seeing that?
It is a very smart question because I think, anecdotally, well, first it makes logical sense because progress is not a straight line. And just like with hybrid, right? We went from it wasn't a thing to then it became the biggest thing, and now people are backpedaling, and it's still to be determined. But I think that's still progress because there's a conversation and there's trial and error, and generally speaking, if you're forced to change for outside reasons, that change isn't sustainable, right? And you're going to want to go back to what it was. So I think as we see economic pressures of a downturn, recession, or cooling off in most places. Leaders and managers go back to the safety zone, which is basically focusing on results. And even though I think we're still transitioning towards a very healthy improvement of work, whereby even in people's scorecards, leaders, the how matters much more than before. And it isn't just about the what, it's also the how. I do think that a lot of managers and leaders still think that the how is very fluffy and could interfere with the what. And, let's face it, most organizations, if things get tough and, money isn't abundant, they're not going to hold people accountable who are hitting results, even if they're not behaving properly. And they're not going to retain people who behave very well and advance the culture, but maybe don't hit results. But fundamentally, we need to understand that the cultural transformation takes time. And the more you care about people, the more results will come.
And I think there's something in that link back to the light side of this, where you found the sense really that our uniqueness can be amplified, which gives us a chance to go, so let's use AI in a way that actually gives us even more of that, gives us a chance to show the value that's in that, right? So organizations have talked about customer loyalty for a long time, and they do all sorts of net promoter stuff, don't they? And they make it into little metrics and they think, look, we've got it. But actually, it only takes one bad experience, that customer's gone, and their NPS won't tell them that. Do you think AI is going to give us a more deeper, sincere, and useful information trail to make decisions on?
Yes, but the key is that, you need to turn information into insights, and then you need to turn insights into action. So I think the information is there, but we have so much information that the noise is almost unbearable. But I think that's also where human expertise comes in, because you and I can be searching for the same stuff online, and information is commoditized. We have access to it, and it won't change very much. I mean, yes, of course, if you're using proprietary data to train the AI, it might be different, but most of us will access the same crowdsourced data. But depending on your previous knowledge, you will be able to interpret that information better than me. And depending on your previous experience and your personality and your guts or courage and the risk appetite that you have, and also your network and relationships, you will be able to make smarter decisions with the same insights than me, or vice versa, right? And so that's why I think, the human fact, it's how we interact with AI, and we can always rely on AI to translate data into insights, but we need to turn insights into action. It's no different from in in investment banks, for example, and hedge funds. They all license the same information from Bloomberg and the same sources, etc., but they differ widely in their achievements and accomplishments. And that's because when humans start to use that tool, the expertise and the human factor actually makes a difference. Or, if we have a phone or a photo camera or any computer, the interaction is what turns the output into something more or less valuable.
And that's really given me a sense of the uniqueness that you're talking about there when you just made that comparison about algorithmic processes and the difference that's coming from that is all of those unique factors that have made us who we are, right? So I think there's a restoration of faith in our value because of that uniqueness. And I guess what I'm hearing is that we've got to double down on that. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. So a very simple example. Imagine, and we're not very far, that we are both managers and we're running virtual meetings and we have our employees, and that Zoom or Teams have real-time emotional sensing AI that tells us if our team members are bored, engaged, if they want to speak, if we have been speaking for a long time. Yeah. We all have the same functions, but you're going to make very different decisions on this basis than me. And that's because, we manage people differently and we have different priorities and personalities.
That's the art bit that I really like. Hey there, it's Perry Timms, host of Tomorrow's People. Let's talk about HR solutions. From hiring to payroll, an all-in-one solution is simply better for business. A solution like Personio covers each stage of that all-important employee lifecycle. Upgrade your HR work today at personio.com. That's Personio.com. I'm curious now whether, Thomas, there's a link between the book that you wrote about how do all the incompetent men become leaders, right? And AI and bias and selection, like you talked about earlier on. It sounds to me like there is something that says we can put right some of the bias wrongs that we've had as individuals using machine learning and tech, right?
Exactly right. And I think, the last 3 books that I did by myself, there's one in between on the future of recruitment, but it's still the theme, are sort of like a trilogy. The Talent Delusion basically was a call to action for HR professionals and leaders to become more data-driven in how they manage people and how they think of potential and talent. Why so many incompetent men become leaders and how to fix it. The how to fix it part is basically you need to use data. And AI was emerging as the modern version of psychometric assessments or old school IO, industrial organizational psychology tools. And of course, if we don't do it, we're going to continue to have incompetent men in leadership roles that make life very miserable for everybody. And now, I wanted to go beyond just this can be a very useful tool to the bias organization to also highlight some of the dark side or the negative or adverse implications of depending too much on technology and forgetting that ultimately we are humans and we are still in charge, so why don't we actually get our act together and utilize this tool for something that helps us upgrade ourselves?
Yeah, it does feel like there is, and it's been threatened a long time, hasn't it? A sort of a dawning of what it really means to lead other people in a new way, because I guess I'm sort of envisaging myself in a couple of years having a bot assistant that I train, that I talk to your bot and whatever, and yet we will still want to come together in a room to do something very creative. So I'm almost thinking, I love the exaggeration of that because that feels like a world I want to be. Really
and equally, if the metaverse actually really takes off and it takes off for work, we could see a world in which your deep fake is working alongside my deep fake and we are doing a joint, seminar for our deep fake clients. And, but we still need to figure out what we'll do when that is happening. I mean, it sounds great. But, the real question is, how do we reinvest it? I mean, I think it was Maynard Keynes in 1915 who predicted that by the year 2000 or 2010, technology would be so advanced that the average person would only work 15 hours a week. It hasn't happened, even though, golf memberships during the week have gone up in the UK and the US, but that's also because we're working all the time. And, we continue to work even when we're not in working hours. So I think, how to be productive is one thing, but how to actually develop and grow intellectually and harness our creativity and imagination as AI continues to improve is a big question.
And we see some very inventive use of it already, don't we? To the point that educational establishments are going, no, ban it. Don't let it anywhere near. And people are kind of going, I remember the calculator conversation in the 1970s, right? There is something, isn't there, about our ability to just play and just learn, that we ought not ignore the fact that technology can do that for us. We can play and learn, but it can also be a more dangerous version, like playing with a chainsaw in some respects, right?
Yes.
So we've got to be discerning, and I think there is a different role, isn't there, for parents, for educators, for the workplace.
So on the calculator, yes, and I think Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI and CEO, said he does like the calculator for words analogy, although that's very trivial compared to what this can do. You can go back to ancient Greece, where when Socrates and his fellow philosophers were opposed to the salient disruptive technology of the time, which was writing. And they thought, if we actually write things down, it will ruin our memories. Obviously, it hasn't happened, although, Luddites have existed ever since and will always exist. But I do think that, the most important thing is that we think about how we need to rethink education. I still teach in 2 universities. Most of my colleagues want to ban ChatGPT and generative AI, and they are shocked. I force my students to use it. Instead of telling them write an essay on Freud, I tell them to write an essay on what ChatGPT gets wrong about Freud. And then they have to use it, they have to read beyond, and I have to see what they think or how they think.
That simple twist of what it gets wrong about it. I love that because it gives us that critical thinking that the World Economic Forum have been telling us for ages is a future super skill, right? And everybody's bizarrely been looking at that going, what do they mean by critical thinking? Do you know what I mean? It's like, I outsource that now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's the first time in our evolution that we can outsource our thinking, full stop, René Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. The only thing that I cannot question is the fact that I think. And the only thing that is uniquely and inherently human is thinking. Not anymore. Which is why we now have to rethink our humanity based on the things that AI cannot do or the things that we can do differently. And I think, that's a good challenge.
And it is the thinking, feeling, almost like not quite tug of war, but interplay, I suppose. Because you're right, we do sometimes have a sensation and we look at data. I mean, Malcolm Gladwell covered some of this, didn't he, in Blink, right? And our urge tells us, no, that's not right. And then it's like, but look at the data. I'm like, but I still doubt it. What I think we're now starting to see is different ways we can reconcile that.
Yes. I think there's an element, the combination, even, before AI came to the picture. I mean, we were all using data to make everyday choices. You choose your hotel, your holiday, your bottle of wine, your romantic partner, or the first date. And I think that's fine because it probably reduced the number of, simple and avoidable errors. Same, by the way, if you're hiring people, you can mostly know the people that will probably be a very bad fit. But still, that leaves a lot of room for personal taste, experience, and expertise. And in any of these things, if you like movies, you probably dismiss all of the recommendations that Netflix does because you know better. Often that leads to an hour and a half choosing something, and by the time you get there, you go to sleep. Same for music, same for wines, etc. So we can use AI to calibrate and refine our expertise and to get a sense of how much we actually understand something.
Great word, calibrate. And I think that is where we can use our critical thinking much more consciously, I suppose. And of course, your area, talent, people, leadership, and so on, there are already, I know, lots of recruiters that are putting AI to use, and they are using it in a way that's like, just help me get on top of a big data surge so I can look at a smaller set and I use my skill there. That feels like the right balance, right?
Absolutely. And look, I mean, I'm going to talk about our recruiters. So at Manpower Group, we employ something like 10,000 recruiters around the world, right? And we have something like 50 million people, job candidates, touching our various ecosystems every year. Our recruiters love generative AI. Why? Because for the first time, they can truly spend a lot less time on very low value, repetitive, boring activities, which is, correcting a candidate's cover letter or CV when they know they're really good, but a typo will make them, be rejected unfairly by a candidate. Correcting the often not very good job ads that our clients give us, so that actually they can appeal more. So from the very beginning, they were like, "Can you reformat or edit the style of this job ad so that it actually appeals to people from this generation or this city, etc." And with that, they can actually spend more human time with clients and candidates, helping clients understand what they need, which is very different from what they want often, and helping candidates understand what they need, which is often different from what they want. So I think, it has truly augmented the human and humane aspects of being a recruiter.
And given them that high touch feel that's more rewarding anyway, isn't it? So when we went into that realm where you're saying about, the nature of work and how robotic it is, and you talked about it, the Maynard Keynes link, and it's like, how do we become over busy and almost like glorifying busyness, right? There's almost like a swing back now, which is actually we could use this to tame the busyness and be much more discerning and perhaps even philosophical about what we do.
Well, here I think, ultimately there's a great opportunity to change how we measure productivity. Look, we're in a wonderful radio studio today, and I remember the first job I ever did was as an intern in Argentina in a radio studio, and I was basically, doing a little bit of research, compiling work, and on my first day, I was sitting with my arms crossed, and one of the, my senior people there said, "Never ever cross your arms because it looks like you have nothing to do," and it So already then, the first thing that you realize is that there's a noisy and irrelevant but problematic performative element to doing your job, which is about pretending to do your job rather than doing it. And during the pandemic, when people were sent back home and offices shut, a client of mine actually asked cynically, "Without the office, how will I pretend to work?" Because we basically are spending a lot of time measuring the time people are supposed to work. But if you believe in talent, you have to understand that talent is basically performance minus effort. If you're talented or skilled at something, it will take you less time and less effort to achieve the same. So if organizations can hire people who are talented, which is great, then what they need to do is to find a way to incentivize them to reinvest the time they save on something. But if they can't do it, then you should pay people for what they achieve, not the time that they're supposed to be working.
Wow. It feels like there's a new dawning for people science within the HR profession particularly, because I can imagine leaders being somewhat perplexed by that. They're like, what? That's a new equation? I don't get it. But I do think it's what we've been looking for, right? Because productivity feels like it's been a misfiring metric for a long time.
Well, because most people really measure it and talk about it as output. Right? So they say, the UK economy, it's not productive because total output is not growing. And you say the same about companies and other countries. But actually, the correct way to think about productivity is output divided by input. If you're doing the same job that you were doing last year, but now you can do it in 40% less time, but you achieve the same, output is the same, but you're more productive.
Exactly.
Now, if I want output to increase, I have to find something for you to do that 40% of the time. So actually, even when you think about the problematic impact that distracting technologies have had, and I talk in the book about how AI is basically a weapon of mass distraction because, then people are still more productive. Because if you're actually spending 30 or 40% of your time on WhatsApp and TikTok, etc., but your output is the same. You're doing the same with less. And, the data on this are very clear. I mean, something like 70% of people report to being distracted at work, mostly because of AI-fueled algorithms that hijack their attention. 60 to 85% of smartphone use occurs during working hours. And multitasking, which we all do, is a myth and deducts 10 IQ points from our performance. So it's basically as debilitating as smoking weed, minus the advantages for creativity. And if people do both at the same time, it's not 20 IQ points that they drop, but probably more. So, so I think that's why total output has an increase, because we look forward to wasting the time we save on social media.
There may be something in how wasting time becomes something that we don't look at quite so badly,
Very good point.
right?
Yes.
Because it is about rest and it's about rejuvenation and so on. And
I love this point, by the way,
Yeah.
because even the old school version of wasting time is, I'm in my office and
Yeah.
colleagues come and distract
Yeah.
me. Actually, that is so important to lubricate the social ties and create, team level creativity. So you're absolutely right.
And that's where, again, I think it needs HR to be much more scientific about this,
Mm-hmm.
both in its data and interpretation that links to performance outcome-based metrics, but also then the psychology of us, right? Going back to the uniqueness that you talked about earlier on. If a company wants to be unique, how can it be unique when it creates robots out of its people?
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And actually, there's a beautiful thought, and you can apply it to life in general, right? We are optimizing our lives for speed, and we are terrifying of wasting time. So the majority of people, they don't just go to Starbucks.
No.
They order in advance and the app is there. And then the Starbucks person has the order there. But that's one step closer to automation.
Yeah.
You have to waste time to tell the person, the human in front of you, how are you?
Yeah.
What's your name? How is it going?
Yeah.
And often when you do that today, people are shocked. Like this isn't part of the protocol. And why are you wasting my time and your time? Yeah. But that means being not just human, but humane in how we deal with people.
Yeah. And there's something about dignity. You put that in some of your summaries, didn't you, about dignity and compassion and kindness you talked about earlier on. Thomas, that's brilliant. I mean, I'm now hoping that there's a different lens that people are looking on from an AI perspective, still with a degree of the skeptic that you need, right, to make sure we don't get hijacked by it and be overly, like you say, utopian about it, but equally much more curious about, hey, this future could be us reprogramming the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there is definitely huge improvements in AI's ability to understand humans, even though it cannot really understand in the traditional sense. But AI has learned a lot about predicting humans in the last 10 years. Yeah. We need to get better at understanding AI.
Yeah.
And often we can use AI to improve our understanding of ourselves. Yeah. Because I think the more AI resembles humans, the more we dislike it, because we see our negative features reflected in it, right? Yeah. So even when we see that ChatGPT is a little bit like an insecure narcissist, you ask it something and it would say, I don't actually know anything about this, but I will still give you 2,000 words and I hope you like me.
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting, isn't it? Is there anything you want to leave us with about perhaps some tips or takeaways that we haven't covered yet that you wanted to share?
No, look, I think just my high level recommendation is that people approach this with this area, right? AI, that they approach it with an open mind, with an experimental mindset, and that they understand that nobody really has the answers. It's about asking the right questions and trying things out and then finding incremental improvements over the status quo. If we abandon the very, very common double standards that make people horrified when a simple or single AI experiment goes wrong, while being perfectly happy with a status quo that is very often far from ideal, then we can see this as iterations that are progressive and incremental improvements over the status quo, which is often a very low bar. And, the goal is not perfection, but finding better ways of being wrong.
I love that exploratory mindset. You made me think of a new kind of Rodin thing, which is, I'm unique, I prompt, therefore I am. That's
I love that. Yes, I like that. I
That's,
prompt, therefore I am. Yes.
Yeah, that's where you took me. Thomas, that's been great. In the show notes, we'll put some links about where to find you and your work. Thank you again for sharing the thoughts and the wisdom. And I can imagine it's the sort of thing that you were fascinated about in the research side of things. Distilling it for now, it feels like it's going to be an ongoing thing for you.
Yeah, I think so. And, I thought this would be a very obscure book.
Yeah.
Luckily it was published on the week that ChatGPT was launched. So, so there's a big upside in terms of the interest that people have in book sales. The downside, of course, is I had to write it myself. I couldn't outsource it to it. But, maybe the next books we'll see are books about humans written by generative AI for generative AI. But we still should enjoy the ones we write. Oh, yeah. And I think, there's a wonderful snobby elements to being humans that make us value the human creation still. And, I hope we keep it.
I think we will. And you'll help us get there, no doubt. But again, Thomas, thank you for your time. And it's been a pleasure. If you've you've enjoyed this episode of Tomorrow's People, please subscribe and check out our previous episodes from wherever you get your podcasts from. And if you want to transform your people processes, head to personio.com.